One move, one pilot. The world's most powerful military alliance was left silent. This is the true story of how a single Pakistani pilot stunned NATO in the sky. It was early morning. The air was cold, the runway still wet with dew. In the distance, you could hear the soft hum of engines starting. On one side of the airbase, the NATO pilots were getting ready, confident, relaxed, sure of their dominance. On the other side alone, sat a single Pakistani jet. Inside that jet was a man whose name would soon be remembered in every pilot's lounge across the world. His eyes were fixed on the horizon. His breathing was slow. This was not just a flight. This was a test of skill, courage, and pride. For years, critics had called Pakistan's Air Force outdated. They said the jets were old, the training not enough, the pilots no match for NATO's advanced technology. But those critics had never been inside a PAF training mission. They had never seen how these pilots trained under extreme conditions. How they flew with limited resources, but unlimited determination. Today was a NATO air exercise, part of their regular drills. But for Pakistan, it was more than that. It was a chance to prove themselves against the best of the best. The odds? Unbelievably against them. NATO had multiple fighter jets, all modern, armed with the latest avionics. Pakistan had sent just one aircraft, one man, one shot. The commander's words before takeoff were simple but heavy. You are not flying for yourself today. You are flying for every pilot before you and every citizen back home. Make them remember who we are. The engine roared to life. The aircraft shook as power surged through it. Slowly it rolled to the runway. In the cockpit, every switch, every light, every sound was being checked. No mistakes allowed. Not today. The jets took off in sequence. NATO's formation was perfect. A wall of steel in the sky. They moved like a machine, every maneuver drilled and rehearsed. But the Pakistani jet flew differently. It darted, twisted, climbed, and dived with unpredictable energy. The NATO pilots were forced to adjust again, and again, losing their rhythm. The lone jet refused to be pinned down. In the NATO control room, operators watched in disbelief. On the radar screen, one green dot was dancing around multiple red ones, not running away, but attacking. Minutes turned into a tense battle of wits. Every NATO move was countered. Every attempt to lock on target failed. The lone pilot was flying as if he could see the future by the time the first round ended. The impossible had happened. NATO's best were outmaneuvered by a single Pakistani jet. This was only the beginning. Asterisk, the NATO pilots returned to formation, their pride. Slightly bruised. They had underestimated their opponent, and they knew it. But now, they were ready to strike back. From the ground control, NATO commanders gave new orders. Their strategy shifted. No more underestimating, no more playing safe. They wanted to trap the Pakistani jet, surround it, and force it into submission. High above, the Pakistani pilot understood exactly what they were trying to do. His training had prepared him for this. Every maneuver he made was not just about escaping, it was about controlling the fight. He pulled the aircraft into a steep climb, engines screaming against gravity. At 20,000 feet, the world below turned small, almost unreal. Then without warning, he cut power slightly, rolled the aircraft, and dove sharply. It was a move that forced two NATO jets to break formation, avoiding a collision. This was psychological warfare. Every time NATO tried to box him in, he created chaos in their ranks. He knew that in air combat, the mind was as important as the machine. The Pakistani jet was older. Yes, didn't have the same advanced sensors or cutting-edge stealth. But what it had was a pilot who understood every inch of his machine, who knew how to push it to the edge without breaking it. On the radio, NATO chatter grew tense. Where is he? Lost visual. Lock him down. Lock him down. Lock never came. The Pakistani pilot used the terrain, the clouds, and even the sun to his advantage. He would vanish into the glare, only to reappear on the enemy's tail seconds later in one breathtaking moment. He managed to position himself directly behind a NATO jet, a perfect firing position. In a real war, that enemy would have been gone. Simulated kill was confirmed by the exercise systems. That was when NATO realized they weren't just facing a good pilot, or facing a master tactician. As the second round ended, the score was shocking. Multiple NATO losses against a single Pakistani jet. The NATO control center went silent for a moment. This was no longer an exercise. This was a lesson they would never forget. And the most incredible part, the pilot was only getting started. The exercise entered its final phase, and the tension in the air was electric. NATO's pride was on the line. They couldn't afford another humiliation. From their command center, they sent in reinforcements, more jets, more speed, more firepower. The sky above the ocean became a chessboard of roaring, engines and flashing metal. But the Pakistani pilot welcomed the challenge. He had been trained for outnumbered scenarios where survival meant using every trick in the book. This time, NATO tried a pincer movement, jets approaching from multiple angles, attempting to leave no escape route. The trap was closing fast. The Pakistani pilot took a deep breath, eyes scanning the radar and the horizon. At the very last moment, instead of fleeing, he turned towards the closest NATO jet. The move was so unexpected that the NATO pilot panicked. For a split second, in an air combat, a split second is fatal. The Pakistani jet sliced through the gap, rolling sharply to avoid incoming simulated missiles. Then he climbed vertically, disappearing into a thick cloud bank. NATO scrambled to track him, but their radar struggled. Moments later, he burst out of the clouds directly behind two NATO jets. The kill confirmations lit up instantly. The radio filled with urgent voices. Break right. He's on my 6. Where is he getting this speed? The answer wasn't speed, it was precision. Every move he made was calculated to disrupt their coordination. NATO's superior technology was useless if they couldn't pin him down. On the ground, NATO officers exchanged uneasy looks. They were watching their finest pilots get outplayed again and again by a single opponent. The Pakistani pilot wasn't just defending himself, he was taking control of the entire exercise. He pushed NATO into reacting to his moves, forcing them onto the defensive. When the final simulated missile hit was confirmed, it wasn't just another kill. It was the moment NATO understood they had been completely outclassed. The story wasn't over. There was one final twist in the skies, and it would seal this encounter into military history. Asterisk. Asterisk. The exercise was almost over. NATO pilots thought the humiliation had ended. They began to relax, flying in formation. Certain the Pakistani pilot would not attack again, but they were wrong, flying dangerously low over the ocean. Just meters above the water, the Pakistani pilot used the waves to hide from radar. Invisible until the last second. Then he rose sharply under NATO's formation, a move so fast their radars barely registered it. Within moments, his targeting system locked onto 3 jets at once. In the simulation, that meant *3 more. Kills *. In just seconds, the skies went silent. On the NATO radio channel, a stunned voice finally said, "Who is this guy?" At the control room, even NATO commanders stood frozen. The exercise ended. But everyone knew the truth. One Pakistani pilot had defeated multiple NATO jets without losing once. When they reviewed the footage later, NATO pilots noticed something important. He never just relied on speed or weapons. His real power was in the mind game. He made opponents doubt themselves, hesitate, and then fall into his trap. Back at the base, as the pilot stepped out of his jet, he was met with applause, not only from his own crew, but also from NATO pilots who now respected him deeply. Wasn't just a training win, it was proof. Technology and numbers mean nothing. If you face a master of the skies, and somewhere in NATO's secret report, one line was added, *, never underestimate the pilot from Pakistan, *.